Welcome to the Ultrahuman experience. This session is free for you for the complete experience. Please download the Ultrahuman app.
Good evening. My name is Brian, and tonight we take a journey with Buck, our massive and fluffy canine friend. Before we go on this journey, let's just take a moment to get comfortable. Pick a comfortable position, preferably on your back. Close your eyes and focus on this sound. Slowly feel your muscles easing up. Feel the tension from your shoulders sink into the mattress. Focus on your breathing. Relax your forehead and close your eyes. Your body feels nice and relaxed now. Imagine you are in a big white mansion. Big French windows let light into the mansion, and you feel the warmth spilling in from outside. Through the windows, you can see acres of green lawns sprawling in all directions. The sunlight is a warm golden yellow. The air you breathe is clean and fresh and sweet smelling. You walk through the French windows out onto the front porch. The wood beneath your bare feet is soft. You take a step forward and feel the bare grass of the green lawn under your feet. You are stepping forward into California at the end of the 19th century. The sky above is a soothing light blue that fills the heavens. It is a beautiful day. In the distance, a large dog runs around in a garden. He is a cross between a Saint Bernard and a Scotch Shepherd dog, and his name is Buck. His fur is long and fuzzy, and underneath this majestic mane is a supple, toned body. You just know that hugging him would be like hugging a large brown ball of cotton. Buck has large floppy ears that droop down to his chin, yet they are perfectly triangular in shape. He is mostly brown all over, except for his snout and his big, heaving chest. Buck has a white stripe that starts on the tip of his nose and travels all the way till his forehead between his eyes. His chest, too, looks like it is splashed with white paint, shaped like a cloud. His paws are big and fluffy. But the most unforgettable part about Buck is his eyes, twinkling as if a star had dissolved in them, full of curiosity and mischief. Buck has a great pair of hind legs, too, that helps him leap unimaginable distances, and soft yet thick paws that cushion his landings. He lives in Santa Clara, a small sun-kissed town by San Diego. It is a lazy town. To pass time, people love skipping down to the pier for a golden sunset and let the last rays of the day's sunlight dance across the sky, while dipping their feet in warm water which is just the right temperature. Not too hot, nor cold. Folks in this town spend their evenings having a few drinks and gazing out at the blanket of stars that sprawl across the sky, watching over the town every night. During the day, when the sun comes beating down in the middle of a hot afternoon, the people of Santa Clara retreat indoors to the calm, cool, cozy comfort of half-naked naps on fleecy mattresses in large four-poster beds. During this time, Buck loves to retire for an afternoon nap in the shade after spending the morning hours running around in the gardens. If there's one thing Buck associated with the word home, it was the way the grass smelt just after being watered on a sunny morning. Smelling of this scent, Buck would become paralyzed. Placing his chin down on the prickly yet soft blades of grass, Buck looked on to the endless horizon of green lawn dotted with yellow flowers and red fruits. Buck lives with Judge Miller. He is not the only furry resident of Judge Miller's mansion, but is one of the more pampered ones. He gets long belly rubs, slobbery kisses, and extra tight hugs. Buck was not an inside dog, but also not an outside dog. He was the only one who got to roam free and as he pleased. On particularly cold nights, Buck got to sleep on the carpet inside the mansion, next to the fireplace. Buck enjoyed the warmth that radiated from the room and flirted with his fur. As the fog rolled in outside the yard that he could see from his windows, the heat from the logs would have an especially tingly effect on Buck's ears. His eyes would droop, and he would sink into the high-count Persian rug that was placed in the room. Buck had the life any human, let alone dog, would kill for. On one especially beautiful day, Buck was wandering around the gardens as usual, accompanied by the mansion gardener, Manuel. As Buck walked ahead, taking the lead, Manuel followed behind him, closely. Buck made sure to stop at every new flower that bloomed, to smell it. It was a clear, light blue sky, almost as though it was painted by a master artist. The few clouds that did drift lazily across were low-hanging. But on this day, Buck's adventurous spirit got the better of him. For once, Manuel allowed Buck to wander past the horizon that he never stepped out of before. Manuel fastened Buck with a double-knotted collar, and both of them wandered out, beyond the bonds of Buck's palace of dreams. Within a few short minutes, Buck was down by the train tracks. The day had almost come to a close, and the blue sky had turned a dazzling shade of gold. There was a single goods train by the track. Buck had never seen one before. The heavy, circular iron rods rested on the monorail strip, sinking into the metal tracks. There were 2 other men near a coach that was open, but Buck had now become suspicious of Manuel. Then, Manuel handed one end of the leash over to the men. Buck struggled, trying to leave. But with a small tug on the leash by one of the men, Buck was silenced. The more he fought back, the more violent the tugs got. The men handed over a cloth to Manuel, and Manuel left, leaving Buck with these strangers. As the train began to move, Buck's stomach started churning. It wasn't just that he was anxious, but he was hungry too. The confusion of what was about to happen did not help. Thankfully, the lub-dub and the back and forth motion of the train soothed him. It was like he was in one of the cribs that Judge Miller had for his children. Buck imagined that he was in one of those to help him soothe himself. He placed himself comfortably into the dried grass that slowly massaged his body and waited for the next chapter of his life to begin. Buck spent 2 days on the coach before it came to a stop. When the coach opened, the 2 men came and led Buck out into a cart. The air around him was cold, colder than he had ever experienced before. Every time Buck exhaled, a large cloud formed right outside his nostrils. He found that to be a bit amusing. His fur acted as a blanket that wrapped him like a cocoon. The cart came to a sudden halt. The 2 men took Buck down from the cart and placed him in what looked like the front yard of someone's house. There was a man in a red sweater waiting for Buck. Buck ran out towards the man in the red sweater. Buck was about to attack him, but was stopped when the man bent down and placed a bowl of water in front of Buck. Buck put his face into the bowl almost immediately. The warmth of the water in the cold air of the night was exactly what Buck needed. The water, to a thirsty dog, tasted fresher than anything he had ever tasted before, and he could feel the tiredness of the journey melt. The man in the red sweater then placed a large steak in front of Buck. The aroma filled Buck's nostrils, and at once he began salivating. He started to lick the meat. It was juicy, fresh, and perfectly seasoned, so deliciously tender that Buck barely needed to chew it. Soon, Buck was full, and his eyelids began to droop as he became drowsy. He loved the feeling of having a full stomach. Buck began to relax. The man in the red sweater brought out a bed for Buck. It was soft and warm, made from used cotton. As Buck stepped into it, his paws sank into the soft, downy bed. He felt safe. He curled up to one side in the bed, that supported his body, and fell into the deepest and happiest slumber. The man in the red sweater put up a woolen blanket over the bed. Even though it was freezing outside, Buck was snug and warm inside this little bed. When Buck woke up, he had never been so relaxed. His shoulders were loosened, his eyes felt light, and all his muscles felt like they had been massaged. All his body parts were jelly. But he still needed to figure out where he was and what this man in the red sweater wanted from him. Buck could smell something sweet in the air, as if someone was making caramel popcorn. He stood up and looked around. One of the men pulled out a large bone and began to wave it at Buck. Buck felt an instant jolt of joy run through his veins. With a giant leap, he shook his blanket aside and went straight for the bone being waved at him. The man threw the bone far away in the distance, and Buck made a run for it. Buck ran like the wind, bouncing up and down with every step he took. This was the first time Buck could take a look around. He was inside a small clearing in the middle of what appeared to be a dense forest. This clearing had a small wooden house to one side and thick, lush grass all over. The cold had condensed over the grass, making them look like tiny diamonds all over the fields. Warm rays of sunlight fought with the trees and tried to make their way to the clearing, but were not too successful. Only a few yellow golden patches were there, scattered around randomly. As Buck sprinted across this beautiful view, chasing the bone that was still tumbling through the air towards the end of the clearing, he passed by the remains of a campfire. The ashes of the campfire were still warm, and it smelt like coal, mixed with molten cheese and tinfoil. This smell was oddly familiar to Buck, as Judge Miller and his children would frequently roast marshmallows in a campfire. Buck picked up the bone and made a dash back to the man who threw it. Buck knew this game well and loved playing it. As he ran back, the cold air filled his mouth and his lungs. Buck felt alive. He returned the bone to the man and was rewarded with a few minutes' worth of scratching under his ear. The fondness for this man was instant, and Buck followed this man into his cart. They drove off beyond the clearing and into the woods. Buck loved going on rides in the cart. He stuck his snout out into the air, and his ears would flap rhythmically to the wind. As they journeyed deeper into the woods, the sun too bid them adieu. They finally stopped outside a small tent. Buck couldn't see the other side of it. He only saw the behind of it. The two men walked in and guided Buck. He followed. Another bed awaited Buck inside the next. Next to the bed was a bowl of water that Buck drank and then fell asleep. He woke up after a few hours. The two gentlemen in the tent spoke with a thick French accent. One was called Francois, and the other Perrault. Buck moved and soon got their attention. Francois smiled at Buck and threw him a piece of a bone. Buck was not interested in food. He wanted to know where he was and why it was so unnaturally cold. Buck took a step out of the tent. The men were looking into a map, using candlelight and marking out some tracks. Buck placed one foot outside and looked up at the sky. It was a deep blue, almost black. There were a few stars sprinkled across the sky, and thick clouds that hung low, almost within reach. Buck took a long, slow and deep breath. When the cold air hit his lungs for the first time, Buck felt a calm like he had never before. His ears muffled as the slow breeze blew past his face. Buck had forgotten that he was miles away from the sunny mansion he lived in. He enjoyed the refreshing cold wind that caressed his face and blew beneath his ears. And then the most surprising thing happened. Out of nowhere, a small silver chunk of a floating cloud came and landed on Buck's nose. Buck had never seen anything like this before. And then a second one came and landed on his eyes. It melted away within seconds. The third one came and landed on Buck's tongue, and then another one on his ear that tickled him as it trickled down to his cheek. It tasted like water, but it was solid. Buck kept watching the black sky and black lands ahead as they slowly were covered in these wondrous silver flakes falling from the heavens above. Within minutes, there was a white blanket that covered the landscape till the end of the horizon. Buck felt like he was sitting on the giant tea cake Mrs. Miller used to make after she had finished dusting castor sugar all over it. It was Buck's first snow. Buck soon realized that he was now a sled dog. Francois and Perrault were hunting for gold. The next few days were spent exploring this white blanket that covered the forests. Buck was quick to learn how to carry the sleds. Of course, the other dogs helped him and guided him. They would start at the crack of dawn and go on till dark, exploring different paths and digging up dirt in caves. The days then grew into months, and much had happened in these months. Buck had defeated Spitz, the alpha in the crew, to take over his position. Buck then had gained skills to survive in the wild. He knew how to hunt, where to go, and what to do in extreme colds. Buck was a smart fellow. The sparkle in his eyes, filled with unquenchable intrigue and mischief, grew brighter than ever. Soon the gold rush was winding down to an end. People started dispersing back to their homes and to the warmer parts of the globe. Buck and the other dogs found a new home with 3 amateur gold hunters. Buck had learned new tricks, and by now had become the alpha dog. He took the lead in their new adventures now. Buck and his team had ventured so far up north that they had passed the forests. Now all they saw till the horizon was one large blanket of snow. Buck thought they were on a giant frozen ocean. The three amateurs did not know much about surviving in the wild. Buck was a quick learner, and he had learned how to take care of himself. He would tell the team when to rest, when to move, and where to place their sleds. Buck had gained a new survival skill thanks to Francois, which let him judge how thick the ice was. On one rather warm day, when Buck, the rest of his crew, and the three humans were making their way across this vast frozen lake, Buck noticed something he had never before. He saw that the ice beneath his paws looked clear as glass, and he could peek into this magical water world below. It was about a foot of ice that was clear as day. Below the ice was water that looked silver in the soft sunlight that came through the clouds. Buck stopped to look into the water. His face was so close to the ice. He could feel the chill to the back of his eyes. And out of nowhere, a streak of silver passed by him in the water down. It was like a jet of glitter that shot across a soft blue canvas. Buck would never forget what it was. It was about 3 feet long, slender, and beautiful. It had been days since the team was out in the cold. The 3 gold hunters had now even run out of food. They were desperate and looked to Buck to save them. Buck made up his mind. He began guiding them towards the forest in search of running water. Buck knew that where there is running water, there will also be food, shelter, and more people. The entire team was tired. Buck's paws were now numb from constantly being on ice, and his back hurt because of carrying the load all the time. Buck tried to suppress the constant hunger pangs that sprang up to keep the morale of his crew up. After a few hours, they saw a line of smoke going high up into the sky. Morale rose, and they moved in the direction of the smoke and reached a small settlement on the banks of a river. The snow cover wasn't as much here as it was over the lake, and Buck was so happy to be able to see mud again. They were welcomed into the settlement by the people. That was when Buck met John. John and Buck shared a hut. It was a small and cozy room that had a tiny fireplace. There was a rug made out of fur that stretched out on the maple wood floor. Buck sank into the rug. The warmth of the rug instantly spread through Buck's paws and reached straight into his heart. John, who saw how badly Buck needed the heat, put a blanket over Buck's now slightly thinner, more toned body. John felt an instant connection with Buck. He sat down beside him, next to the fireplace, and began rubbing Buck's paws. The 3 amateur gold hunters too had left, leaving behind Buck there. John made stew in the tiny hut. Just a little water mixed with meat and spices. The whole wooden cabin would smell like a spice garden. John would serve Buck the stew in a metal bowl, and the two of them would sit by the fireplace, staring deep into the flames, and eat together in a warm, friendly silence. Soon, Buck started feeling healthy again. He had put on a few inches and looked stronger too. John was ready to take Buck out of the cabin now. When Buck stepped out of the cabin, he saw that the settlement was full of happy people and their animals. Buck made a few friends, and all these dogs would spend their time running around the settlement. The river on whose banks the settlement was built was a big river. It was vast and calm. Buck would run around the river, playing catch and sinking his feet into the clay. He loved drinking the fresh and cold water that came from the river. Buck also loved how the river changed color. He would sit by it for hours. In the mornings, it was a deep blue. As afternoon would come, the waters changed to a shimmering gold and yellow. But Buck's favorite color of the river was the crimson hue it took during sunset. It reminded Buck of his home back in Santa Clara. Buck's other favorite part about this settlement was that every now and then they would have a campfire by the river. All the people would gather around it. They would roast potatoes in the fire and grill fish too. Buck loved eating grilled fish. The soft and tender meat would melt in his mouth. At night, Buck loved sleeping under the stars. The constant cloud cover had now given way to clear skies. Buck had never seen so many stars in his life before. Some were white, some were blue, and some were red. And every now and then there would be a piece of a star that would shoot across this dome. It looked like someone was striking a giant match in the sky. The light would be so strong, it seemed brighter than the sun. Buck would wait for these pieces of stars to fall by and wonder where they landed. Not long after, Buck and John set off on their own adventure. John grew tired at the settlement, and they were running out of supplies too. When Buck was with John, Buck was free to roam the forests. He was free to run with the other wolves or catch salmon in the rivers. Buck felt like he was back in the miller's place. While John explored the woods, chasing lost gold, Buck was given the golden days of his life back. The cold was no longer harsh. Spring was once again around the corner, and the trees were in full bloom. Buck felt like he was back in his garden, except it was even better than before. The soil under his feet was so soft, it went between his toes every time he took a step. Nothing could be more relaxing. He was given the chance to explore many streams, splash in their cold waters, and play in their tides. The water was the right amount of cool and the air warm. Buck would casually step into the streams that came up to his elbows and catch a salmon. He now would eat meat that was raw and delicious. Buck would go for swims in the deeper waters and dry off in the sun, lazing on the banks of the river. Buck and John had ventured so deep into the forest in the opposite direction that they reached the end of the forest. It happened suddenly. Buck and John were strolling along a path in the forest when all of a sudden John stopped in his tracks. John looked down and noticed there was a little bit of sand in the mud. A smile spread across John's face instantly. He made a run for the beach, which he knew was ahead, calling Buck with all the joy he could muster up. Buck too got excited and started chasing after John. Buck had never seen a beach before. As soon as the forest ended, Buck was hit with a view that looked like a painting. The sun was being swallowed by the sea, turning the water a shade of orange that looked delicious, just like candy. The breeze was warm and blew straight into Buck's face. Buck ran, galloping in the sand that was so soft. It took him extra effort to pull his paws back out of it. The sound of the waves crashing was so soothing. Buck never wanted to leave this place. He ran as fast as he could, following John straight into the water. To Buck's surprise, the water was warm. John stopped to soak in the last few minutes of sunlight, and Buck stood next to him. John then came down on his knees and looked straight at Buck, right in the eyes. John kissed Buck and gave him a big, massive hug. The two of them hugged and fell asleep on the beach that night. They burrowed into the sand and fashioned themselves a cozy spot. That was the life that Buck led from then on. He began watching and following birds. He loved the way they sang their songs and cooed in a mellow, low tone. It was calming and so very beautiful. One day, when Buck and John had just gotten back from the forest after fetching some firewood, they saw someone waiting for them on the beach. There was a woman who spoke to John. Buck had never seen this woman in his life, but he liked her. It was obvious, even to Buck, that she loved John. And soon, Buck found out that she had been friends with John long ago, and had loved him then too. She sat next to Buck and thanked him for taking care of John. John decided to go back to the world. They asked Buck to accompany them, but Buck decided to stay back. He had gotten used to this life. Buck joined the other wolves in the wild. He now lives with them, running free and sounding the call of the wild.